The 2024 NFL Draft has produced a number of really good players, so in today's video, I want to rank the top 10 rookies thus far through the first couple weeks of the season. So as I mentioned, we are going to be ranking the top 10 rookies thus far through the season. These will be both offensive and defensive rookies. Anyone can count towards this list. And before we actually hop into the list, I do have 3 honorable mentions. These are players who I heavily consider to be in that number 10 spot, but ultimately I could not fit them in there. And those guys are going to be Cooper Beebe of the Dallas Cowboys, Kool-Aid McKinstry of the New Orleans Saints, and Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. All 3 of these guys are really good players and look like they have extremely bright futures, but I just couldn't put them in my top 10 yet. But with that all being said, we're going to go ahead and hop into this list. But before we do that, if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. But now let's get to the list. And we are going to begin with Zach Frazier of the Pittsburgh Steelers. On PFF, he has played a total of 203 offensive snaps, giving up 0 sacks allowed, as well as 0 penalties, with a PFF overall grade of 76.8. Now, I know PFF is not the say-all, be-all, but I will be using their statistics and some of their grades to kind of prove my point, because it's really hard to prove a point, especially on offensive linemen. It's really hard to just talk about it with just, taking my word for it. So if you guys think I'm wrong, you guys can blame PFF for this. Watching the highlights for Zach Frazier has been really interesting. He was somebody who I thought was very raw when it comes to pass protection, but really dominant when it comes to run blocking. And I would say thus far, you kind of seen a lot of that. I think early on in the year, like week 1, week 2, he had a couple reps that weren't the greatest, but I think as time has gone on, he's gotten better and better when it comes to being really good in pass protection. And when it comes to running the ball and using him as a pure run blocker, he's one of the best offensive linemen in terms of this rookie class that could do that job for this team. And for a team like Pittsburgh that is full of young offensive linemen, I mean, this is a really good pickup for them. And it does seem like they're going to have a future center who can do a bit of everything for quite some time. In fact, if you look at their actually most recent game in week 3, Zach Frazier had the 3rd highest PFF grade with an 88.8, only behind James Daniels, who's also on the Steelers, and Tyler Linderbaum of the Baltimore Ravens. So it does feel like this team has a bit of a steal in their hands. Coming in at number 9 is going to be J.C. Latham of the Tennessee Titans. Now, when you talk about this Titans team, this is a team that has a bunch of issues, especially along the offensive line. But one player who has been playing very good football, especially as of late, is J.C. Latham. Initially, towards week 1, he was struggling big time. I think he had over 5 pressures given up in that game. But since then, he has played better and better and better. And in his game against the Green Bay Packers, he only gave up 1 pressure, which is a good sign of improvement. Playing the offensive tackle position is extremely difficult, especially when you compare it to a position like the center spot. With the tackle spot, you have to just make up so much more ground, whereas the center, you're going up against bigger but slower pass rushers, and you're also it's a lot easier because you're in the middle, you have a guard next to you, whereas a tackle spot, you're on an island, one-on-one, it's very difficult. But in the 184 offensive snaps that he has played, he's only had 1 penalty and 1 sack given up, and again, a lot of that was early in the year. As the year has gone on, he's gotten much better, and it does look like the Tennessee Titans have themselves a future tackle in J.C. Latham. Now they just have to look to fix the rest of the offensive line because it's kind of a mess. However, coming in at number 8 is going to be Jared Verse of the LA Rams. Now, admittedly speaking, Jared Verse would be a lot higher on this list if he simply could just finish some of these sacks. He's gotten to the quarterback so many times, but he just cannot finish the sacks, which is very frustrating. But if he was able to, we're talking about somebody who maybe is in like the top 6. However, on the year, Jared Verse has 8 solo tackles, 6 assisted tackles, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble with a PFF grade of 75.4. However, with all that said, he also does lead all rookies with 4 tackles for losses, and he has a pass rush win rate of around 25%. So this is a dude who's getting the job done when he's getting put out there. Again, we're talking about somebody who, if he were to continue to play at this level, has a conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year, while also if he can just finish the job and actually get the tackles and finish the sacks, he probably should win the award. We'll have to wait to see if he continues this progression or if he slows down, but thus far through the beginning of the year, it does look like the LA Rams have themselves a really good pass rusher who can do a bit of everything in Jared Verse. However, coming in at number 7 is going to be Quinyon Mitchell of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, he's definitely had some ups and downs, but given the fact that he plays one of the hardest positions to translate from the college game, I would say thus far he's done pretty well. On the year, he has 10 solo tackles and only has given up 10 receptions on 17 targets. He has a PFF grade of 67.9, and I would say the eye test has backed that up fairly well. Now, in that game against the Atlanta Falcons, where the Atlanta Falcons had a game-winning drive, he really did struggle in that drive. He gave up some receptions along the boundary that you just would not want to give up if you were a corner. But I would venture to say outside of those handful of plays, for the most part, he's played very well this season. And for the entirety of the season, he has forced 6 incompletions, which is really impressive. He also has had his hands in a number of pass deflections and has went up against some really good quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins and Jordan Love for a little bit. So he's been thrusted out there in a position to make plays immediately. And I would say he's played pretty well, especially because now Darius Slay is injured and now he's being promoted as a rookie to being the cornerback 1. So that tells you everything you need to know about what that Eagles team thinks of Quinyon Mitchell. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about at number 6, which is going to be Joe Alt of the LA Chargers. Now, his worst game, unfortunately, is probably his most recent game, but it also does line up with what is easily his hardest challenge in TJ Watt. In that game against TJ Watt, he really did struggle because TJ Watt is absolutely ridiculously good. But outside of playing up against TJ Watt, I think Joe Alt has played very well thus far through the season. On his 172 offensive snaps, he's only given up 1 penalty and 2 sacks with an overall PFF grade of 77.0. But as I mentioned, when you're going up against arguably the best pass rusher in the entire NFL, any player would struggle, let alone a rookie who's in his 3rd overall start. So I don't really take too much into that because you're going up against fucking TJ Watt. But outside of that, in the first 2 weeks, he played really well. And, you know, there were some reps where he played really well against TJ. I mean, he did give up a sack and had a couple holding penalties that were called and not called. But I feel like he's playing pretty well. I don't think that this was really much of an indictment on who he is. I think he's going to be a great tackle in this league. It just happened to be that he went up against a really good TJ Watt. Outside of that, though, he has been really good, really dominant, really good in pass protection, really good in run blocking. It's just, hey, when you go up against TJ Watt, you're going to get bullied. It happens. Moving into our top 5, we are going to begin with Talicia Fuaga of the New Orleans Saints. Similar to Joe Alt, he's also been thrusted into that starting offensive tackle position, except I would say Talicia has handled it a tad bit better and a bit more consistent than Joe Alt has. Of course, Joe Alt had struggles in week 3. Talicia really hasn't had any struggles. On his 175 offensive snaps, he has a PFF grade of 70.4 and only giving up 1 penalty with 0 sacks allowed. Now, when the Saints drafted Talicia Fuaga, we knew that he was going to be somebody who took a little bit of time to really develop as a pass blocker, but when it comes down to it, he was so dominant as a run blocker with physicality and just coming downhill on double teams and just being a menace. And I would say thus far, we've sort of seen that this Saints team has understand that Fuaga isn't quite yet there as a pass rusher, and because he's playing at that left tackle position, it's made it really difficult for them to just put him out there on an island. So thus far this season, you've seen a whole lot of chip blocking, tight ends there to help him, and a whole bunch of ways to help him out as that left tackle, whereas that hasn't quite happened for Joe Alt. But I would say that given the fact that he has still developing those skill sets, I would say he's done a very good job. One, he has been out there on an island. He's been productive as a run blocker, which we all knew was going to translate from the college level. And in terms of being a pass blocker, I would say he's done a very fine job. Yes, they've been helping him a crap ton, as I mentioned earlier, chip blocking, all that stuff. But when he's been tasked to do it by himself, he's been able to get the job done. So I would say he's easily been around a top 5 rookie. Moving on to number 4, we'll be discussing Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, in case you guys have not been watching Raiders football, I don't blame you. It's been a whole lot of ugly football with some bad quarterback play, no run game, but a bright spot of this team has been Brock Bowers, who's put up some really good statistics thus far through the season. Through 3 games, he has 18 catches for 197 yards, with his longest catch going for 27. I would also say that given the fact that he was known to be primarily used as a receiving option for the Georgia Bulldogs, he's also been somewhat decent in terms of run blocking. Again, you're not asking him to do that a whole bunch because you have other options, but when he has been tasked with those type of duties, I think he's done a very fine job. And when you take this 3-game sample size and you add it up to see how much he would have after a 17-game season, he would approximately have around 1,100 receiving yards, which I believe would be the first time that a tight end has had 1,000 yards since Kyle Pitts. And again, when you're talking about a Raiders offense that has really nothing going on for it outside of the receiving core, Brock Bowers has been an extremely bright spot for that team, and it does appear like moving forward, this is going to be a team that has their future tight end and perhaps maybe more of a future playmaker that they can utilize in Brock Bowers. Everything that we projected him to be coming out of college has come to fruition thus far through the season, and I would say he's been extremely worth that pick for this Raiders team. But let's move on to our top 3, and we are going to begin at number 3 with Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Week 1 admittedly was a really rough game for him. He only had 1 catch for 4 yards, but in these past 2 weeks, he has been super dominant for what has been a really fun to watch Arizona Cardinals team. Obviously, in that Week 2 matchup against the LA Rams, he absolutely exploded on the scene with 4 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, with most of that work, if not, I think all of it, coming in the first half. And then in Week 3, with a lot of anticipation of his matchup with other first-round pick Terran Arnold, he had 5 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. And everything that we thought Marvin Harrison Jr. was going to be has essentially come to fruition, similar to a lot of the players on this list. We all expected Marvin Harrison Jr. to step in day 1 and be a true wide receiver 1 for Kyler Murray, and I would say that's basically what you got from him. His route running has been clean, his catching has been very clean, he hasn't really had any issues. Again, we're talking about somebody who was thought of as a generational talent, somebody who we thought could instantly come in there and be argued as a top 10 receiver, and I would say thus far we haven't had anything to sort of dispute that. He's been playing really good football at a high level for a Cardinals team that, as I mentioned earlier, has been very fun to watch and has been very competitive with a lot of really good teams, and a big part of that is because they actually have a true wide receiver 1 in Marvin Harrison Jr., so it looks like they have their guy. Next up, we are going to be at number 2 with Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders, and he is the only quarterback that's on this list and included in my honorable mentions. Caleb Williams has had some struggles thus far through the season. Obviously, JJ McCarthy had the injury. Bo Nix looked good in Week 3, but really bad in Weeks 1 and 2, so we'll wait and see on that one. And then, of course, other quarterbacks like Michael Penix Jr. haven't played yet, same with Drake May, so it's sort of a time will tell sort of thing with those guys, but thus far, I would say that Jaden Daniels has clearly looked like the best quarterback of this young group of quarterbacks that just got drafted. On the year, he has a completion percentage of 80.3 with 664 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. And when it comes to running the football, because we all know Jaden Daniels is extremely gifted with that, he has 171 rushing yards for 3 touchdowns. He does have 2 fumbles, but he was able to recover both of them. And of course, his highlight game of the season was this most recent game against the Cincinnati Bengals, where he absolutely diced up that Bengals defense, which is a veteran unit that probably shouldn't be getting diced up by a young quarterback. Jaden Daniels has looked the part. He's looked ready for the moment. He's come out there immediately, has made plays with his legs, has made plays with his arms, and I would say that thus far through the season, I would actually venture to say that he's been a little bit surprising with his arm. We all thought it was going to be a tad bit of a work in progress, but I wouldn't say that's really been the case. He stepped in day 1 and led this Washington Commanders team to a victory in Week 2, a very competitive Week 1, and a victory in Week 3. And as we sit here today, this is a Commanders team that nobody thought would make the playoffs, but if Jaden Daniels keeps up at this pace, there's a shot at it, especially with how bad some of these NFC teams have looked. However, he is not our number 1, because our number 1 is going to be Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here, but I don't know if there's a single player out there that has as much on their plate as a guy like Malik Nabers. And what I mean by that is Malik Nabers' team around him is so bad that he is really the only piece of offense that has been good on this Giants team. This Giants team has bad quarterback play, bad running game. The other receivers aren't that good, whereas Malik Nabers is really the only bright spot outside of maybe a decent offensive line. And I would venture to say that of all the receivers out there, he has the most on his plate and most things to do. Because you take Justin Jefferson off that Vikings team still has other guys who can get the job done. Same thing with somebody like Tyreek Hill. CeeDee Lamb is I guess a bit of a subjective one. You can definitely make the argument that he has a bunch on his plate too. But given the fact we are talking about a 21-year-old rookie who's in his 4th ever game and already has almost 400 receiving yards with almost 40 catches and 3 touchdowns, is absolutely ridiculous. I am a little bit worried about his usage, but I do believe he's going to be an absolute stud for this Giants team moving forward, as long as the dude can stay healthy. Now, if you want to make the case that Daniels plays the harder position, so he should be number 1, I'm not going to argue on that one. But in my opinion, Nabers has so much on his plate with such a bad team around him, but he's still producing at a very high level. So that's why I have him at number 1. But as I said in the intro, if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. And I love you guys. Peace.